Picture this, you're at a massive estate sale, right? There's a priceless, one-of-a-kind family heirloom sitting on a table. It's not yours, but nobody's watching. Your sister, who happens to be a very important person, could maybe, just maybe, make a phone call and make it all go away. It's a tempting thought, isn't it? Well, that's basically what just happened in one of the most jaw-dropping royal scandals in a long time. We're talking about a stolen brooch, a secret plan to cover it up, and Prince William, the future king, putting his foot down and saying no to the queen herself, right in front of the whole royal machine. This isn't just about a shiny piece of jewelry. It's about power, family loyalty, and what happens when someone tries to bend the rules. And honestly, it's kind of mind-blowing that this whole mess started so quietly. So, to get the full picture, we have to go back in time. In 2017, the Governor General of Canada gave Queen Elizabeth II this incredible gift. It was a brooch called the Sapphire Jubilee Snowflake. And this wasn't just any old piece of bling. This was a super special state gift, made to celebrate her 65 years as queen. They used these rare, beautiful blue sapphires from Baffin Island and lots of diamonds. It was truly stunning. But the most important thing to know is that a gift like this isn't for the queen to keep as her own personal jewelry. It's not like a birthday present you get from your grandma. Nope. A state gift belongs to the crown. That means it's supposed to stay in the Royal Collection Trust forever. It's meant to be looked after, protected, and passed down to future kings and queens. That's just the ironclad rule for these kinds of national treasures. You simply can't give them away to your sister just because you feel like it. Then, in 2022, everything changed. Queen Elizabeth passed away. When that happens, there's a huge, chaotic transition at all the royal palaces. They have to count and organize tens of thousands of artifacts. They're moving things from one residence to another, and basically everything is getting shuffled around. And in all that confusion, there was a big gap in how they were keeping track of everything. Basically, someone made a huge mistake with the inventory system. It was a total mess. And that window of total chaos is exactly what someone needed to sneak in and take advantage. And that someone was Camilla's sister, Annabel Elliot. Now, here's where things get absolutely bonkers. Annabel Elliot is just a regular person. She doesn't have a fancy title. She doesn't have an official royal job. She's not involved in any of the important political stuff. She's just a private citizen. But somehow, right in the middle of all that inventory chaos, she managed to get access to the super secure vault where they were keeping the Sapphire Jubilee brooch. And then she took it. She actually physically removed a national treasure from the restricted archives and took it to her own private home. And then she just kept it there for months, wearing it around her house like it was her own personal sparkly accessory. Nobody was watching it properly, so nobody noticed it was gone. It was like she had just borrowed it for an extended sleepover. Eventually, though, the royal team did an independent check of all the state property. They wanted to make sure everything was where it should be, and that's when they caught the problem. The brooch was missing. It wasn't in its designated spot. So, they started digging into the records and figured out that it had been taken without any of the proper permission. There was no paperwork, there were no signed forms, nothing. Annabel Elliot was just holding onto a piece of the nation's history in her house with zero legal right to have it. And under British law, that's not just a little oopsie. That's actually illegal. You can't just take public property and keep it. It's a crime. So once this audit uncovered what happened, Camilla, the Queen Consort, realized her sister was in big, big trouble. This wasn't going to be a quiet family chat. This was a case for the actual police and the high courts. And Camilla really, really didn't want to see her sister go to jail. So she decided to do something that is honestly pretty shocking. At the time, King Charles was recovering from some medical issues. He was resting and wasn't at his full strength. And Camilla somehow managed to get into his private rooms. Then, she used his official authority to issue something called a protective directive. Basically, she had documents written up that said the king, by his own personal power, was giving the brooch to her sister as a gift. The whole idea was to change the situation from being an illegal theft into a legal transfer of property from the king himself. If this plan had worked, it would have made the whole investigation disappear. The police wouldn't have been able to question her sister. They couldn't have gotten a search warrant. They wouldn't have been able to do anything. Because the plan was that if the king himself had given permission, then the law would protect everyone involved. Camilla was trying to use the king's authority, while he was weak to just make this whole problem vanish. It was actually a pretty clever strategy. The palace has all these old school ways of dealing with family problems in private. They usually just fix things behind closed doors, and nobody ever finds out. Camilla was hoping that everyone would just go along with the directive, because it had the king's seal on it, and nobody would want to cause more drama while he was getting better. She was counting on the old idea that you just don't argue with an order from the king. But that's where the whole thing got really interesting. Because Princess Anne, who is basically the ultimate guardian of all the royal treasures and the official protector of the Royal Collection Trust, is the one who received this directive. And Anne just looked at it and said, "Nope." She flat out refused to accept it. She told everyone that the brooch was never classified as personal property, and that no single person, no matter who they are, has the right to treat national gifts like private toys to give away to regular people. Anne wasn't trying to be nice or find a middle ground. She basically said, "This is a legal problem, and we're going to deal with it that way." So, she gathered all the evidence, all the inventory records, all the documents that proved the brooch was stolen and that Camilla's sister had no right to it. And then she took all of that evidence directly to Prince William at Kensington Palace. And that's when the whole situation completely changed, because now the future king had all the proof of what happened, and this wasn't something that could be swept under the rug by palace workers anymore. William's main job is to protect the royal institution and make sure it survives. And when someone tries to steal state property using the king's authority while he's sick, that's not a little problem you handle quietly. That's a big deal you address directly and completely. So, William had a big decision to make. In the old days, he might have just handled it all inside the family. He could have kept it a secret, protected the family name, and had some quiet talks with Camilla to make it go away. But that is not what he did at all. William looked at what happened and he treated it like what it actually was, a straightforward crime. Someone took state property. That person happens to be related to the royal family, but that doesn't change what they did. He made it very clear to his legal team that this wasn't about protecting people from getting in trouble or using family connections to escape responsibility. The message was simple. The law applies to everyone, including people who are related to the king. He issued a new rule that was really clear and strong. He said that from now on, there are no exceptions and no special treatment for private people who have, or are trying to hide, or are trying to steal historical treasures that belong to the crown. He made this a permanent rule. It wasn't a temporary decision that could be changed later. This was a new standard for how the monarchy would handle these kinds of problems. The way William did this was actually pretty brilliant. He transferred all of Queen Elizabeth's most important historical artifacts and symbols into a brand new thing called the Royal Heritage Trust. And this is a big deal. This trust is completely independent. Camilla can't influence it or use it to protect her family. The assets are now legally locked up and tied to the direct line of succession. That means they are protected, no matter what any current king or queen wants to do. So, he basically created a wall that makes it impossible for anyone, including the king or queen, to use state property for personal favors. Once this trust was officially set up on June 10th, 2026, all of the old protective orders and directives that Camilla had tried to use became totally worthless. They had no legal power anymore. All those documents she had created to protect her sister were completely useless. Her sister was now facing the full force of the High Court, just like any other ordinary person. There was no palace protection she could hide behind. And William didn't do this quietly. He made the new rules known to everyone in the royal household so they understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't a hint. This was a clear statement that the modern monarchy operates on legal rules, not on family loyalty. And here's the really important part. The actual raid on Camilla's sister's house happened really fast after all of this. The High Court gave the order, and on the morning of June 10th, a special team showed up at her private home to get the brooch back. This wasn't a small operation. It was an emergency seizure authorized by the courts. They went in, found the Sapphire Jubilee brooch, documented everything, and took it back. The speed of it was amazing. From the moment William said what he was going to do to the moment the authorities actually showed up, there was almost no time at all. There was no room for negotiation. No chance for Camilla to try something else, or for her lawyers to find another way out. The enforcement was fast and final. What's interesting is that the palace press office went totally silent after that. They weren't allowed to say anything without permission from Kensington Palace. There were no official statements, no explanations, no press releases trying to spin the story. The palace basically said nothing. And I think that silence was actually on purpose. If they started explaining and defending themselves, it would just keep the story going and make people ask more questions. By staying quiet, they let the action speak for itself. The brooch was recovered. A national treasure was returned to where it legally belonged. Camilla's plan to protect her sister had completely failed, And the fact that nobody tried to make a deal or find a compromise after the raid was authorized says everything about how serious William was. There was no last-minute agreement. The legal process just moved forward. Now, what happened after the recovery is also really significant. The very next thing we see is Catherine, the Princess of Wales, wearing that Sapphire Jubilee brooch at an official state event. And this wasn't an accident. This was a smart move. Catherine wore that brooch on her fancy dress and showed up in front of crowds and important visitors, wearing a piece that had just been taken back from Camilla's sister's house. There was no big announcement, no explanation from the palace. Catherine just wore it like it was the most normal thing in the world. And that visual statement was way more powerful than any press release. It was a way of saying, without saying a word, that the brooch was recovered, it was back where it belonged, and it was now part of the direct line of succession. The message was super clear. While Catherine was out wearing this historic piece that belonged to Queen Elizabeth and would be passed down through the future kings and queens, Camilla was wearing other jewelry from her own collection. Which is fine, that's what she should be doing. But the message about who has access to what and who gets to wear the symbols of the monarchy was completely established right there. And that's really the moment where you understand what just happened, because this wasn't just about getting a piece of jewelry back. This was about establishing something really important about how the modern monarchy works and what the actual power structure is right now. For a really long time, the way things worked in royal families was that you handled everything in secret. If there was a problem, you dealt with it behind closed doors. You protected family members. You used the institution's power to protect people from getting in trouble. And sometimes that meant justice didn't really happen, but the other choice was to make all your dirty laundry public. So, they made trade-offs. They accepted that certain people got special treatment because of who they were or who they were married to. But what William and Anne did was basically say that time is over. They said the law applies to everyone, no matter how close they are to the king, and they didn't just say it, they actually proved it. When Camilla tried to use the king's authority and the old ways of palace protection to shield her sister, they didn't negotiate with her. They didn't try to find a compromise. They just went straight to the courts and let the legal system handle it. That's a huge change. For decades, maybe even for hundreds of years, the idea has been that if you're connected to the royal family, you have certain protections. Maybe not official ones, but everyone knows that your connections matter and that people will try to help you out. Camilla was absolutely betting on that being true. She was counting on the fact that nobody would really want to aggressively go after the queen's sister. That would look bad. That would create family drama. It would be messy. But William looked at that plan and he said, "No, this isn't about family drama or avoiding messiness. This is about whether the royal family actually has integrity or whether it's just for show." And he decided it was going to be real integrity. The brooch goes back. The law applies, that's it. What's really important to understand is that this sets a rule for the future. It shows that when someone breaks the law or breaks the rules that protect state property, the response isn't going to be a quiet family conversation. It's going to be a legal process. And that applies to everyone, no matter who they are related to. So, if you're part of the royal family and you do something illegal, you can't just rely on palace rules to protect you. You're going to face real consequences. The move to the Royal Heritage Trust is also a big deal because it basically takes away Camilla's ability to influence these kinds of decisions in the future. She can't make new orders. She can't try to make different arrangements. She can't use her job as Queen Consort to help her family members in ways that might risk the protection of state treasures. The trust is independent. It has its own leaders, and the treasures are locked up for the direct line of succession. This is actually a really smart design when you think about it, because it understands a reality that people don't always like to talk about. Sometimes the people in power have conflicts of interest. Sometimes the king or queen consort might want to do something that isn't best for the monarchy. Maybe they want to give something valuable to a family member. Maybe they want to help someone they care about avoid consequences. The trust structure removes the temptation and makes it impossible. You can't do it even if you want to. And the fact that this is now public knowledge, and everyone in the palace knows the new rules, actually probably prevents future problems too. If anyone else ever gets the idea that they could use their connections to get special treatment or to take state property, they now know it's not going to work. They're going to face actual legal trouble. The palace isn't going to protect them. What I think is really interesting about how this all played out is how fast and decisive it was. There was no long negotiation. There was no back and forth. There was no attempt to keep it quiet and manage it the old way. William saw the problem, he understood what needed to be done, and he made it happen fast and clean. That actually tells us a lot about how he thinks about his role and about power in the monarchy. Catherine wearing the brooch publicly is like the final punctuation mark on this whole story. It's a visual way of saying that the recovery was a success and that the treasure is now safe in the direct line of succession. It's also a subtle but very clear statement about where power actually lies. Catherine is the future. The brooch belongs with the future. Not with Camilla, not with Camilla's family, but with the people who are going to be leading the monarchy next. The bigger message here is that the British monarchy is showing that it follows the law just like any other institution. You can't hide behind a title. You can't rely on family connections to get you out of legal trouble. If you break the law, you face the consequences. And that actually probably makes the monarchy stronger in a lot of ways because it means the monarchy can't be pushed around by family politics. It has actual rules that apply to everyone. When you look at the whole story, what you see is Princess Anne saying no to an order from the king. You see Prince William taking that information and treating it as a legal matter instead of a family one. You see the High Court getting involved. You see the treasures being moved into a trust that protects them from future problems. And you see Catherine wearing the recovered brooch in public as the final proof that the institution protected what it was supposed to protect. That's a very different monarchy than the one that existed even a few years ago. It's an institution that's willing to enforce its own rules, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means causing conflict with people who have powerful jobs in the family. That matters. That tells us something about the future and about what kind of institution the monarchy is actually going to be from now on.